There's a rule in northern Michigan that everyone who lives up there knows. If the woods go silent, you leave. I didn't. I stayed another 20 minutes, and that decision cost me my truck, my rifle, and almost my life. What hunted me that night didn't want to kill me right away, it wanted me to run. I realized that too late, when I found the claw marks on my door the next morning, marks that weren't there when I locked it. Whatever hunted me in Michigan was deciding whether I was worth keeping. Before I get into this, I need to say one thing. I'm sharing this because people go missing in places like this every year, and most of the stories never get told. If you listen to accounts like this, consider subscribing. These are the kinds of warnings you don't want to miss. I was 36 when this happened, old enough to know better, young enough to think I still had something to prove to myself. I worked as a licensed electrician out of Traverse City, mostly residential jobs, cabins, and seasonal places that needed winterizing before the snow really set in. I'd grown up hunting with my dad and uncles, learned how to read tracks, how to move through woods without making noise, how not to panic when things went wrong. I wasn't reckless, and I definitely wasn't someone who believed in monsters. That's important to understand. I didn't spend time on forums, didn't listen to spooky podcasts, didn't swap campfire stories about Dogman or Bigfoot. If someone brought that stuff up, I usually laughed it off and said the same thing every Michigan guy says: wolves, bears, or drunk people. There's always a normal explanation if you're willing to look for it. The job that put me there was simple. A client had a small hunting cabin west of M37, about 15 miles outside of Baldwin, tucked back off a network of logging roads most people didn't know existed unless they owned land out there. He wanted the power shut down, breakers labeled, and a couple of outlets replaced before winter. I could have done it during the day, but I'd pushed it off too long and ended up heading out late, figuring I'd finish before dark and be back in town by dinner. That was the first mistake. It was mid-October, the kind of fall day Michigan does better than anywhere else. Gray sky, low clouds, the smell of wet leaves and cold dirt in the air. The temperature hovered just above freezing, and there was a steady breeze that rattled the branches overhead. I remember checking the weather on my phone before I lost service and seeing a chance of flurries overnight. Nothing serious. Just enough to make the woods quieter than usual. The drive-in was routine. I turned off the highway, past the last gas station for miles, and followed a two-lane road that narrowed into gravel. My truck, a dark green Ford F-150 I'd owned for years, bounced and rattled the farther I went. I had the radio on low, some local station fading in and out between static and country songs, and a thermos of coffee in the cup holder that tasted like it had been reheated too many times. By the time I reached the logging road that led to the cabin, the light was already starting to go. The trees closed in, tall pines and maples forming a tunnel that swallowed the last of the daylight. I remember thinking how early it got dark up there once fall really set in. 1 minute you're fine, the next you're rushing. The cabin itself was nothing special. Single story, weathered wood siding, metal roof, a small porch out front. No neighbors. No lights visible in any direction. I parked the truck beside the building, grabbed my tool bag, and went to work. Inside, it smelled like dust, old pine, and propane. I flipped breakers, replaced the outlets, labeled the panel with a Sharpie. Normal, boring work. I checked the time when I finished. Just after 7:30 p.m. Outside, night had settled in completely. The wind had died down, and the temperature dropped fast once the sun disappeared. I stepped onto the porch and paused, letting my eyes adjust. That's when I noticed how quiet it was. Not peaceful quiet. Empty quiet. At first, I brushed it off. Cold does that. Animals bed down. Wind shifts. I told myself all the usual things while I locked up the cabin and walked back to the truck. I tossed my tools into the bed, leaned my rifle, a .308 I kept for deer season, against the tailgate, and took a second to finish my coffee. That's when the silence really hit me. No insects. No wind in the trees. No distant road noise. Just the sound of my own breathing and the faint ticking of my engine cooling. My blood ran cold, and the hair stood up on the back of my neck for no reason I could explain. I remember thinking, this is stupid. You're tired. You've been working all day. I picked up the rifle and slid it behind the seat, locked the doors, and climbed in. When I turned the key, the engine hesitated longer than it ever had before catching. It was probably nothing. Cold engine. Old battery. But in that moment, every instinct screamed at me to leave. Instead, I sat there. I told myself I'd wait a minute, finish the last sip of coffee, maybe send a quick text once my phone picked up a bar. I cracked the window and listened, trying to prove to myself that I was overreacting. That's when I realized something else was wrong. The woods weren't just quiet. They felt like they were listening. I couldn't explain it any better than that. Time seemed to slow down, and I became hyper-aware of everything. The fog forming near the ground, the way my headlights cut short against the trees, the smell of damp leaves mixed with something sharper, almost like wet dog. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely screw the lid back onto my thermos. I thought about the rule then. The one everyone knows and never talks about out loud. If the woods go silent, you leave. I checked my watch. I had already been sitting there 5 minutes. I decided to give it a little longer. Just long enough to calm down, get my head straight, and drive out like a normal person. That decision, those extra minutes, set everything else in motion. I started driving down the gravel logging road, low beam headlights barely cutting through the fog that had begun forming in the clearing. At first, everything seemed normal. The tires crunched over the loose stones, the truck rattled like it always did, and the smell of damp pine clung to the cab. But after a few minutes, I noticed it. The forest had gone completely silent. Not just quiet, but wrongly quiet. I'd been in the woods hundreds of times, alone at night, and I knew what silence felt like. This wasn't it. This felt deliberate, like the woods themselves had been holding their breath, waiting for something. I shrugged and told myself it was just the cold settling in. Animals tend to bed down when the temperature drops at night. Deer, foxes, coyotes, all of them gone. I looked in the side mirrors, half expecting headlights or a passing car. Nothing. Just black trees stretching endlessly on either side. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up again, sharper this time. My hands itched for the rifle I'd left behind in the truck bed, but I told myself it was fine. I was a grown man, trained to handle situations like this. Rational explanations, I reminded myself. Always rational. Then I heard it. A single low howl, somewhere off to my left. Slow, deliberate, unlike any wolf I'd heard. My heart skipped a beat. I scanned the trees, straining to see movement, but the fog swallowed everything in an oppressive gray haze. I pulled the truck over for a moment and turned off the engine. The silence returned instantly. I waited, breathing shallow, trying to convince myself it was a coyote or some lost dog. But there was something unnatural about the sound. It carried weight, intention. It felt like it was sizing me up, figuring out if I belonged there. I started driving again, slowly, keeping my eyes on the tree line. The howl didn't come again immediately, but something else did, a snapping sound, faint but distinct, like branches bending under weight. It wasn't just one. It came from several directions, staggered. My stomach dropped. Wolves don't coordinate like that, not in this kind of terrain, not this deep off the road. My grip tightened on the steering wheel. I tried to laugh it off. Probably a couple of dogs from a nearby cabin, nothing weird, I muttered. But my voice sounded hollow even to me. The air changed next. I noticed it first as a musky scent, like wet fur and something rotting underneath. I crinkled my nose and rolled up the window, suddenly aware of the goosebumps climbing my arms. The hairs on the back of my neck were sharp enough to hurt. I switched on the dome light and quickly glanced in the mirrors. Shadows flickered in the periphery, fleeting and impossible to pin down. I tried to rationalize again. Trees sway in the wind. Fog makes things move. My mind was grasping at straws, but my body refused to relax. Then came the second howl, louder this time, closer, and answered almost immediately by another from a different direction. My heart slammed. They were communicating. My brain refused to let me believe it, but I couldn't explain it away. I glanced at the road behind me. Empty. Ahead? Empty. Side mirrors? Shadows moving where there shouldn't be. Every instinct screamed at me to drive straight out, fast, but I forced myself to stay calm. I reminded myself I was trained. I was careful. I could handle a dog. Hell, maybe even a wolf. But I was wrong. The snapping noises became more frequent, closer, and deliberate. It wasn't running, at least, not in a normal way. The rhythm was too steady, too intentional. Something was pacing me, keeping distance but tracking me. I could hear my pulse in my ears, a loud, insistent drum that matched the irregular crunch of gravel under my tires. Time seemed to stretch. I glanced at my watch. Only 10 minutes had passed since the first howl, but it felt like hours. Every shadow seemed to twitch just out of sight. I could almost feel eyes on the back of my neck, heavy, patient, studying me. I remembered the rule again, the one everyone in northern Michigan knows but doesn't talk about: if the woods go silent, you leave. I had hesitated before, thinking it was fine. Now I knew hesitation wasn't an option. I told myself I'd put the truck in gear and get out fast. But the road forked unexpectedly, and the logging map in my glove box was useless under the fog and darkness. I made a sharp right turn onto a narrower trail and immediately regretted it. It was a dead end. The road curved and disappeared into thick underbrush. I considered backing up, but the truck slid slightly on loose stones, and the tires sank into soft dirt near the shoulder. The third sound came then. Not a howl, not a branch snapping, a low, guttural growl, impossibly deep, reverberating through the cab. I froze, gripping the wheel until my knuckles whitened. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely reach for the door lock. Time seemed to slow down. Every instinct screamed at me to run, to throw the truck in reverse and leave this cursed road. But part of me, the trained part, the rational part, whispered to stay calm, to assess. My breath came in short, ragged bursts. I could taste metal in my mouth, adrenaline flooding my senses. That's when I noticed it moving along the tree line. At first, it was just a shadow, tall and unnaturally upright. Then another, slightly behind, then a third. They weren't running. They weren't chasing yet. They were circling, testing, waiting. Something in their posture, the way they moved silently through the fog, told me immediately, these were not ordinary animals. I realized that, too late, my hesitation had put me exactly where they wanted me. I tried to rationalize again, telling myself it was wolves, feral dogs, maybe hunters playing a prank. But rational thoughts were slipping away under the weight of fear. The silence between their movements pressed against my chest like water. The fog made their shapes blur and twist, turning every tree into a potential threat. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely reach for my phone to check signal. There wasn't any. I took a deep breath and whispered under it, just drive. Just get out. The truck shivered as I eased forward, tires crunching over gravel and dirt. Every instinct screamed that I was being observed, that whatever was out there could see me, knew my next move. The low growl came again, this time accompanied by a faint rustling from the left, almost like something brushing against the underbrush, perfectly coordinated, aware of my presence. And then I heard it, a third howl, answered twice, echoing in different directions simultaneously. My stomach turned over. My blood ran cold. I knew then I wasn't alone, and I wasn't dealing with a single animal. Something intelligent, something large, something hunting in a pack was out there, surrounding me in the darkness, and I had no idea how far it extended. I gripped the wheel tighter, forcing my foot to the pedal, trying to convince myself that speed would solve it. But my eyes kept darting to the shadows. Every instinct screamed at me to look away, yet I couldn't. I realized, with a sinking feeling, that this was not something you could outrun with skill alone. They were patient. They were watching. And I had stumbled right into their territory. The fog closed in thicker as the truck rounded a bend, and in that moment, I understood, the night was no longer quiet because I was alone. It was quiet because the hunt had begun. The more I drove down that narrow logging road, the heavier the air felt. My truck's headlights barely penetrated the fog, and every time I glanced into the mirrors, I thought I saw movement, shadows darting in ways that shouldn't be possible. I told myself it was exhaustion, the long day, my imagination running wild. I kept saying it out loud, hoping the words would convince me, wolves, coyotes, dogs, nothing more. But my gut screamed otherwise. The first unmistakable sign came when a low growl echoed from behind the trees, then another answered it from the opposite side. I froze for a moment, gripping the wheel so tight my knuckles burned. Time seemed to stretch, my pulse hammering in my ears louder than the faint hum of the truck. The sounds weren't random. They were coordinated, deliberate, testing. My mind ran through all the normal explanations, maybe a pack of feral dogs, maybe hunters' pets wandering. But none of them acted this way. None of them waited and circled, watching for reactions. I eased the truck forward slowly, trying not to make sudden movements. The rustling of leaves and snapping of twigs around me grew closer, coming from both sides at once. My stomach turned over. I had a fleeting, absurd thought. Maybe someone was setting up a prank. But who would bother coordinating multiple shadows in the middle of nowhere, late at night, just to scare a stranger? And more importantly, why did it feel like the eyes behind the trees were studying me? That's when I noticed the first shadow move upright, bipedal, just at the edge of the fog. I couldn't make out details yet, but it was too tall to be a wolf, easily 7 or 8 feet standing. Its shape was too long, too straight, yet it moved with the smooth grace of a predator. My blood ran cold. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely keep the truck in its lane. Every instinct screamed at me to floor it and leave, but I remembered the narrow curves, the loose gravel. I couldn't risk spinning out. I forced myself to focus, trying to rationalize. Maybe it's a hunter. Maybe it's a tree. But then another shadow stepped out behind the first, slightly taller, moving with a rhythm that mirrored the first. And another. I counted 3. 3 massive figures moving silently through the fog, circling me. My heart skipped a beat. I could feel the intent in their movement. They weren't rushing. They weren't attacking yet. They were waiting, testing, calculating. I realized, with a sinking feeling, that I was inside their territory, and they weren't leaving me alone. I tried to keep calm. I eased the truck into a slightly wider patch of road, hoping to maneuver around whatever it was. But my truck hesitated, the engine sputtered, the tires skidded on loose gravel, and I felt that icy hand of fear tighten around my chest. The rustling followed me, perfectly synchronized with my movements, like whatever was out there knew exactly where I was. I could feel their presence pressing in, heavy and patient. Then the second howl came, piercing the fog. But this time, it wasn't a simple call. It was answered almost immediately by another howl from a different direction. I could feel the vibrations through the truck frame. It was impossible to ignore. My rational mind wanted to convince me that wolves were just talking to each other, but my gut screamed at me, they're communicating with each other. And you're the target. I glanced at the mirrors again, and that's when my stomach dropped. 2 of the shadows were moving in perfect unison on either side of the road, keeping pace with me. They weren't just following. They were flanking. My pulse raced. Time seemed to slow. I couldn't move. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely reach for the seatbelt to adjust it. Every instinct screamed that I was outmatched. I had no idea how big they were, how fast, or what they were capable of. The fog thickened, and I caught a brief glimpse of glowing eyes, yellow and intelligent, reflecting my headlights. My throat went dry. My body felt frozen in place, yet my mind screamed at me to drive faster. I could see the shapes of their legs and torsos, the way their shoulders hunched slightly, the curve of elongated limbs. Not wolves. Not bears. Definitely not humans. Something else entirely. Something intelligent, and very, very patient. I tried to convince myself to act normal. Slow movements. Quiet words. I whispered to myself, just drive. Don't provoke them. Just leave. But every time I moved, I caught the subtle shuffle of leaves, the sound of claws scraping bark, perfectly timed with my own adjustments of the wheel. They were playing a game, and I was in it unwillingly. Then came the third incident that shattered my ability to rationalize. One of the shadows broke from the tree line entirely, stepping onto the road just ahead of me. My headlights revealed a massive, muscular figure, standing bipedal, easily 8 feet tall, covered in matted dark fur. Its eyes locked onto mine for just a second, and I swear I saw calculation in them. Not mindless predation, thought. Strategy. Patience. And then it stepped back into the fog, almost deliberately, as if signaling the others. I slammed my foot on the brake, my heart hammering so hard I thought it might explode. I considered trying to back up, but the road was narrow, the gravel loose, and I knew I could spin out in a heartbeat. I tried to speak, whispering to the shadows, hoping to humanize myself somehow. I don't want trouble. I'm leaving. Of course, they didn't answer. But they moved in response, stepping from one side to the other, flanking, circling, always keeping me in their invisible net. By now, I had no illusions. This wasn't just one animal, one predator. This was a pack, moving with coordination, intelligence, and a terrifying awareness of my every action. My chest burned, my throat ached, and my hands shook violently as I realized that if they wanted, they could have me pinned right there on the gravel road. The thought made me nauseous. I felt bile rise in my throat, metallic and acrid. I forced my foot to the pedal, inching forward slowly. The rustling of leaves followed my movement, matched step for step. The fog swirled, shadows shifted, and I caught glimpses of tall, upright forms disappearing and reappearing just at the edges of the headlights. My mind screamed, "This is wrong. It feels wrong. Everything about this is unnatural." And then I heard it, a low growl, almost a chuckle, from somewhere behind me, close enough that I could feel the vibrations in my seat. My stomach turned over. My hands were trembling so badly I could barely grip the wheel. That's when I understood, this wasn't random. This wasn't wolves testing their territory. This was intentional hunting, and I was the prey. I realized I couldn't escape simply by driving faster. Every movement I made, every second I hesitated, was being watched. The pack wasn't attacking yet, but it was controlling the encounter, deciding how far I could go. I had entered their domain, and now the woods themselves seemed alive, waiting to see if I could survive the night. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. My hands shook violently, the taste of metal heavy in my mouth. Time seemed to slow. I knew one thing for certain: if I didn't figure out what they wanted, I wasn't leaving that road alive. And somewhere in the fog, I could sense their eyes, glowing impatient, waiting for my next move. I could feel the weight of their presence all around me, even though I couldn't see them clearly. The fog swallowed everything beyond the headlights, but the sounds told me they were there: subtle rustling to the left, snapping branches to the right, heavy footfalls muffled by the earth. Every instinct screamed at me to drive faster, but my mind kept warning, one wrong move, and they'd strike. This wasn't like anything I'd dealt with before. Wolves don't stalk with patience. Bears don't flank silently, testing your reaction. Whatever these were, they were calculating. I gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles burned. My eyes flicked between the road and the shadows just beyond the lights. Then came the first brush of movement. One of them had stepped onto the edge of the road, just far enough to be partially visible, tall, dark, upright. It didn't charge. It didn't roar. It just stood there, observing, like it was studying me, learning my habits, gauging my fear. I froze in place. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely keep the wheel straight. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but my brain demanded calm. I reached for my flashlight, tapping the beam along the trees, hoping to scare it off. It didn't flinch. It didn't even seem startled. Instead, it stepped back slightly, almost deliberately, retreating into the fog but still keeping me in its line of sight. That's when I realized they weren't hunting like normal predators. They were testing boundaries, probing my reactions, learning what I might do next. I took a shallow breath, trying to steady myself, and decided to inch forward. Every turn of the wheels felt like walking a tightrope over a chasm. Then came a sudden scraping noise along the side of the truck, claws on metal. My stomach dropped. My blood ran cold. I slammed on the brakes, the truck skidding slightly on loose gravel. I couldn't see anything, but I could feel them moving around me, circling, waiting. I tried to rationalize, though it was getting harder. Maybe it was a bear brushing against the metal. Maybe a deer had gotten tangled somehow. But deep down, I knew neither explanation fit. I could sense too many of them, coordinated, patient, aware. My hands were trembling violently, and I realized my fingers had gone numb from gripping the wheel. I had never felt fear like this before. Then came a flash of movement on the left, closer this time. I caught the gleam of eyes reflecting my headlights, yellow, intelligent, calculating. I couldn't breathe properly. My pulse slammed against my ribs. Time seemed to slow down as I realized that if they wanted, they could pin me right here, right now. I tried the horn. Just a quick tap, hoping to scare them off. Nothing. The rustling continued, faster now, like they were moving in response, matching my actions with precision. I felt trapped, even with the truck running. Every instinct told me to flee, but part of me knew that sudden action could trigger a direct attack. I remembered my rifle in the bed of the truck. It was just behind the seat, strapped in. My hands were shaking so badly I had to lift it awkwardly, fumbling with the seatbelt to reach it. I raised it cautiously, sweeping the beam of the flashlight along the trees. The fog made everything seem distorted. Branches looked like limbs, shadows like towering figures. But I knew better. I could feel their eyes on me, calculating, waiting. Then came the first near miss. Something lunged from the left side of the road, brushing the truck so close that the metal rattled. My stomach twisted, and I let out a strangled shout. I slammed the brake, tires skidding, heart hammering. I could hear a low, guttural exhalation, almost a chuckle, somewhere in the fog. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely hold the rifle. I thought about screaming, about giving up entirely. Every instinct screamed, don't move, don't provoke them, survive. I tried inching forward again, slower this time, every turn deliberate. The rustling and growling seemed to respond to each adjustment. I realized they were testing me, gauging how I would react, learning my weaknesses. My mouth was dry, my throat raw, metallic taste in my mouth. I felt like I was inside a trap I couldn't see, a maze designed to strip me of confidence and control. Then the low growl came again, closer now, from behind the truck. My blood ran cold. I slammed it into reverse, trying to back up, but the loose gravel and narrow road made control nearly impossible. My pulse hammered in my ears. I could feel their presence closing in, always just at the edge of the headlights. I realized, with a sinking feeling, that they weren't just stalking. They were circling, coordinating, controlling the encounter. I remembered the fog rolling thicker, reducing visibility to maybe 20 feet. Every shadow was a potential threat. I could feel movement just beyond the lights, just at the corner of my vision. I tried to focus on the road, on staying alive, on controlling the truck. But I couldn't ignore the sense of observation, like they were studying my fear, measuring it, enjoying it. By now, I was shaking uncontrollably. My hands were numb, my chest tight, every breath shallow. I realized I had been holding it all in, adrenaline, terror, panic, for what felt like hours, though it had probably only been 20 minutes. The rustling intensified, coming from every side. My headlights caught glimpses of broad shoulders and long limbs moving with unnatural grace, disappearing and reappearing in ways that made no sense. Then came a moment I'll never forget. One of them stepped directly onto the road, towering over the truck, silhouetted in the fog. I could make out its muscular frame, its upright posture, the fur slick with moisture from the fog. Its eyes glowed faintly in the beam, intelligent and calculating. It tilted its head slightly, almost like it was curious. My stomach lurched. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the rifle steady. I felt trapped, observed, hunted, and utterly outmatched. I realized something crucial in that instant. These creatures weren't mindless predators. They weren't wolves or bears or hunters. They were thinking, studying, and controlling the hunt. My every move, every reaction, was being noted. And I had entered a game I didn't know the rules of. I knew I had to act, but I had no idea what would work. Every instinct screamed at me to drive forward, to escape. But the pack, patient and deliberate, made it clear they were not ready to let me leave yet. My chest burned, my throat dry, metallic taste in my mouth. Time seemed to stretch, each second a drawn-out eternity, and I realized with terror that the hunt had only just begun. I knew I couldn't keep inching along forever. The road was too narrow, the fog too thick, and the pack too patient. Then it happened, the moment I had been dreading but somehow knew would come. One of them stepped fully into the road, just ahead of the headlights. I slammed on the brake, and my heart felt like it had stopped entirely. The creature was immense, easily 8 feet tall, standing upright on 2 legs. Its shoulders were broad and muscular, the kind of strength that made your stomach tighten just from looking. Its fur was dark brown, almost black, matted in places from moisture and brush, with streaks of gray that caught the faint light. Its head was elongated, wolf-like but not entirely canine, a snout slightly longer than a wolf's, jaws strong, but the eyes were human enough to make your blood run cold. Yellow, glowing faintly in the mist, and intelligent. Not wild, but calculating. I could see its hands now, massive paws tipped with claws that looked capable of rending flesh and wood alike. The fingers were long, dexterous, and almost human in proportion. Its movement was graceful and predatory, deliberate, each step measured to maintain stealth and pressure. It circled the truck, testing, observing. Every instinct screamed at me to move, but my body felt frozen, like I'd forgotten how to breathe. Then another stepped onto the road, slightly taller, fur darker, eyes fixed on me with a cold patience that felt wrong, unnatural. Behind it, 2 more shadows emerged from the fog, completing the flanking formation I'd sensed but couldn't see before. I counted 4 massive figures, all upright, all observing, all aware of me in a way no normal animal ever could be. Time seemed to stretch. Every instinct screamed at me to run, fight, anything. I grabbed the rifle, hands shaking so violently I could barely lift it. My fingers ached, muscles locked in tension. I trained the flashlight and the rifle at the nearest one, trying to appear threatening. The fog diffused the beam, but I caught glimpses of its muscles rippling beneath wet fur, the way it shifted weight deliberately, almost testing me. Then I made the worst mistake possible. I breathed audibly. It tilted its head toward me, like it had noticed every tiny sound. The growl that followed wasn't low or animalistic. It was a deep, throaty sound, deliberate, almost mocking, testing my reactions. My stomach dropped. I realized they weren't just hunting me, they were studying me, seeing what I might do next, seeing if I was smart enough to survive. I tried backing up, inching the truck along the loose gravel, keeping my eyes on the tallest one. Its head tracked me perfectly, every movement mirrored. My pulse slammed against my ribs, hands shaking so badly I had to tap the rifle on the seat to steady it. Then, from the right, another of them stepped forward, leaning slightly, almost like it was ready to swipe or test me physically. My blood ran cold. Every instinct screamed at me to move forward, but the truck's traction was poor, and the road curved sharply. One of them let out a low, eerie exhalation, and I could swear it sounded like a chuckle. The fog swirled around it, making it appear larger, almost inhuman. My throat was raw, metallic taste in my mouth. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the flashlight steady. Time seemed to slow as I realized just how outmatched I was. These weren't ordinary predators. They were intelligent, calculating, and patient. Then came the moment that will haunt me forever, direct eye contact. The tallest one leaned forward slightly, its glowing yellow eyes locking on mine. In that instant, I felt exposed, seen, studied. It wasn't hungry, not yet. It wasn't angry. It was curious. And in that curiosity, I realized a terrifying truth. My survival depended entirely on its whim. I tried to breathe, to appear calm, but my body betrayed me. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely keep the rifle trained. My heart felt like it might explode. My blood ran cold. I had never felt fear like that before or since. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but I knew moving too fast could trigger a chase. Then the creature demonstrated intelligence in a way I couldn't ignore. It stepped back slightly, circling to the left, as if trying to herd me. Another followed, moving to the right, effectively boxing me in on the road. I realized they were testing my reactions, seeing if I'd panic or freeze. The low growls and rustling continued, timed with every movement I made. They were patient, deliberate, and terrifyingly smart. I knew I had to survive, but I had no plan. My rifle was useless at this distance, my truck slow and precarious. I remembered a trick from my hunting days: sometimes distraction works better than confrontation. I tossed my flashlight onto the ground outside the truck, hoping the sudden light and movement would confuse them. It clattered against the gravel, and one of them paused, tilting its head toward the noise. The others froze. It worked, just barely. I floored the truck, tires spinning on loose gravel, and shot forward down the road. The fog swirled around me, shadows darting at the edges of the headlights, following, circling, but not charging directly. My heart pounded in my ears. I could taste bile, metallic and sharp. I couldn't move, frozen in place behind the wheel, every muscle trembling. My breath came in ragged bursts. For what felt like hours, but was probably minutes, the pack kept pace, staying just at the edges of visibility, always circling, always watching. I realized this wasn't a hunt I could win with speed. These creatures were controlling the encounter, testing my limits, measuring my fear, deciding when I could live. Somehow, I made it past a bend in the road that opened onto slightly wider gravel. They hesitated, and I floored the gas, the engine roaring, tires spinning. I didn't look back. Every nerve in my body screamed that I was still being tracked. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the wheel. My chest ached from fear. My throat was dry, metallic taste lingering. That night, I learned something I'll never forget: these creatures were not animals. They weren't supernatural. They were intelligent predators, patient hunters, and terrifyingly aware of every move you make. I had been exposed, studied, and almost killed. And I realized with a chilling certainty that they could have ended it anytime they wanted. But somehow, at least for that moment, they let me go. I didn't understand why. Maybe curiosity. Maybe they wanted to prolong the hunt. Maybe they were teaching me a lesson. All I knew was that when I finally made it back onto the main gravel road, further from the fog and the trees, I was trembling so badly I could barely think. I was alive, but only barely. And I knew the woods, the fog, and the pack would haunt me forever. I didn't stop driving until the gravel gave way to the highway, the fog thinning just enough to see the yellow lines and reflectors. My chest burned, my hands shook so badly I could barely grip the steering wheel, and my heart hammered in my ears like a drum. I was alive, but only by a fraction. Every instinct screamed at me to look back, to see if they were following. I didn't. I couldn't. I kept my eyes fixed straight ahead, willing the miles to stretch faster. The adrenaline was still raw, pumping through my veins. I could feel my whole body trembling, not just from fear, but from the effort of staying calm enough to survive. My throat was dry, metallic taste lingering from the panic. I pulled over at the next wide shoulder, engine still running, and just sat there. My hands were shaking so badly I had to rest them on my lap. I couldn't think straight. My mind replayed the encounter in loops, the glowing eyes, the bipedal shapes, the intelligence in their movements. I had never felt fear like that before, and I knew I'd never feel anything like it again. When I finally got control enough to step out of the truck, I did it slowly, scanning the tree line. There was nothing, just the fog lifting, leaves rustling lightly in the cold night wind. My truck's headlights reflected off the wet gravel. The area was quiet again, unnaturally so. That's when I noticed it, claw marks on the door of my truck, deep, gouged into the metal. Marks that had not been there when I'd locked it at the cabin. My blood ran cold. Whoever, or whatever, had done this had been close enough to touch me, to study my reactions, and had let me live. But they had left evidence. I grabbed my flashlight and shone it around. The ground was disturbed, loose gravel shifted in long, straight impressions. Tracks? I thought at first they were just rocks or sticks, but then I saw the pattern, long, bipedal footprints, deep enough to match the weight of something massive, claw marks at the ends. I tried to measure them with my foot, easily a foot long, and the spacing between each step indicated something walking upright, efficiently, not like a bear or a wolf. I realized something else. The truck wasn't the only thing they had tested. They had been studying me, my reactions, my movement, everything I had done in those woods. And the more I looked at the claw marks and the tracks, the more I understood that I had been hunted. Patiently, deliberately, intelligently hunted by creatures that were unlike anything I had ever encountered. I climbed back into the truck, hands still trembling, and started driving again. My route back to Baldwin felt endless. Every shadow along the road made me flinch. Every tree seemed like it could hide one of them, watching me, waiting for me to make a mistake. I kept glancing in the mirrors, half expecting to see glowing eyes staring back at me. But there was nothing, at least, nothing visible. I was alive, but only barely. When I finally reached the main highway, relief didn't come immediately. My body was still taut with fear, muscles screaming from tension. I pulled into a gas station, hands trembling as I filled the truck with diesel. The attendant looked at me strangely, and I mumbled something about late-night work. I didn't mention the fog, the pack, the glowing eyes, or the claw marks. Nobody would believe me anyway. Even I barely believed what had happened. The drive home was slow, my hands never leaving the wheel. My mind kept replaying every detail. I could still feel the weight of those eyes, their curiosity, their intelligence. I thought about what could have happened if I had hesitated, if I had tried to confront them. My stomach turned at the thought. Every instinct screamed that they had been patient because they were curious, not hungry, yet. The thought of what could have happened if they had decided differently made my blood run cold. When I finally got home, I checked the truck again in daylight. The claw marks were still there, deep and undeniable. My hands shook as I ran my fingers over the metal. I could see faint fur caught in the edges of the gouges, coarse, dark brown with streaks of gray. I bagged a small sample, not entirely rational but compelled to preserve proof. The scratches were jagged and uneven, unlike anything a human could produce with tools. My truck had been tested. My survival had been a choice, not chance. I didn't tell anyone right away. I knew what would happen. People would laugh, shake their heads, say I'd imagined it. Maybe I had, they'd argue. But I knew what I had seen. I knew the size, the intelligence, the patience of the creatures. And I knew that leaving that night, I had only barely survived. I had seen firsthand that the Dogman, if that's what they were, was not a myth. They were real. The following days were a haze. I avoided the woods, avoided driving down back roads, and constantly checked over my shoulder. The tracks and claw marks were the only evidence anyone might accept, but even then, most people would call it a hoax or exaggeration. I showed the fur to a local hunter. He shook his head, impressed but skeptical. Could be bear hair, he said. I didn't argue. He didn't see what I had seen. He didn't feel the gaze, the patience, the calculation. Sleep was the hardest. Every creak of the house, every rustle in the yard, made me jump. My blood ran cold more times than I could count. I realized that the encounter had changed me permanently. The fear wasn't just for that night. It was for every time I entered the woods, for every shadow, every rustle of leaves, every howl that echoed in the distance. I had been marked, in a way. A week later, I returned to the cabin during daylight. The forest looked calm, almost normal. Birds chirped. The wind rustled leaves. But I noticed the tracks again, faint impressions in the mud, leading into thick underbrush. No clear indication of their current location, just a reminder that the pack was still out there. Still patient. Still waiting. I left immediately. I haven't gone back at night. I don't intend to. And I warn anyone who drives back logging roads in northern Michigan, if the woods go quiet, leave. Don't linger. Don't underestimate the patience of what lives out there. The Dogman, if that's what I saw, waits, watches, and decides when its prey has had enough time to panic. Even now, weeks later, I can feel their presence in my mind. I can feel their gaze in the fog, hear the low growls echoing in my memory. I know the claw marks on my truck were just a fraction of their testing. I survived, barely, and every instinct tells me that the woods are still alive with them. And I know one thing for certain, I will never forget that night. The days after that night blurred together. Sleep came in fits, punctuated by nightmares where I was back on that logging road, surrounded by the pack, the fog pressing in, glowing eyes locking on mine. I would wake in a cold sweat, my heart pounding, metallic taste lingering in my mouth, convinced I could still hear the low growls and rustling just outside my window. Even in the safety of my home, I felt watched. Every shadow in the yard, every distant sound of a branch snapping, made my blood run cold. I realized quickly that I hadn't just survived an encounter, I had been changed by it. I kept the truck parked in the garage for days, unable to bring myself to drive it. The claw marks were still there, deep and jagged, a constant reminder of that night. I couldn't touch them without trembling. The first sample I had taken from the edge of the scratches sat in a small Ziploc bag on the kitchen counter. I didn't show it to anyone else. The story was unbelievable, and even proof would be dismissed as a hoax. But I knew what I had seen, what I had felt. The Dogman pack was real, patient, intelligent, and extremely dangerous. And I had survived by luck, or perhaps by being studied and deemed not yet worth killing. I tried returning to normal life, going back to work, answering emails, talking to friends. But the encounter shadowed everything. My mind replayed the hunting, the circling, the glowing eyes. I kept imagining the pack watching, waiting for the next careless step, the next mistake. I avoided the woods entirely, even in daylight. Driving through rural roads made me tense, constantly scanning the tree line. I realized that survival didn't just mean escaping that night, it meant changing the way I lived forever. A week after the encounter, I spoke to a local hunter I knew, someone who had spent decades in the northern Michigan woods. I asked cautiously about sightings, stories, anything unusual. He leaned back in his chair, studied me for a long moment, then said, quietly, "You probably saw what they call dogmen around here. People talk, some swear they've seen them. But most don't survive to tell it like you just did." I felt a chill crawl up my spine. He wasn't laughing. He wasn't skeptical. He had respect in his eyes, and maybe fear. That realization hit harder than anything I had experienced on that road. This wasn't folklore, a prank, or exaggeration. It was real. And I had survived because they allowed it, not because I was clever or strong. My blood ran cold at the thought of what might have happened if the encounter had gone differently. In the following days, I revisited the area cautiously during daylight. The forest looked normal, birds chirping, sunlight filtering through the trees. But my trained eye noticed the subtle details: patches of disturbed earth, faint tracks that didn't match any animal I knew, broken branches at unusual angles. I followed one faint trail and realized it led deep into the underbrush, vanishing before I could get a good look. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being observed even now. At home, the nights were worse. I would wake to every sound: a car driving by, a dog barking, wind rustling leaves, my mind immediately jumping to the possibility that the pack was close. I started carrying a knife to bed, a small comfort against the unknown. My hands shook often, and I flinched at shadows on walls, at movements in the corner of my eye. My friends noticed. They asked if I was okay. I smiled weakly and nodded, but I knew it wasn't just fear. It was lasting trauma, a permanent imprint on my psyche. The tracks, claw marks, and fur were the only tangible evidence I had. Every time I looked at them, I relived that night: the rustling, the growls, the circling, the glowing eyes. I realized that survival had come at a cost: my peace of mind. My life had changed. I could no longer venture into the woods without fear. I couldn't hike, hunt, or even drive back roads without the weight of that night pressing on me. I shared the story with a few trusted friends, carefully choosing words to convey the danger without sounding insane. Most didn't believe me, some laughed nervously. A few older hunters nodded solemnly, as if confirming a truth they had always known but never spoke of. That gave me some small measure of comfort. I wasn't imagining it. I had seen, experienced, and survived something extremely rare, extremely dangerous, and terrifyingly intelligent. Sometimes, late at night, I think about them. I wonder if the pack still hunts those back roads, patient, calculating, intelligent, waiting for the next person who doesn't heed the rules. I think about the claw marks and the way they studied me, deciding if I was prey or curiosity. I wonder what would have happened if I had moved differently, panicked sooner, or taken a wrong turn. I don't want to know. My instinct is to avoid the area entirely. Every muscle in my body tenses at the thought of returning. I've learned a few things since that night. The woods are alive with them. Not supernatural, but highly intelligent predators who study, stalk, and hunt patiently. The rules of survival are simple, but critical. If the woods go silent, leave immediately. Don't linger, don't test boundaries, don't think you're clever enough to avoid notice. Evidence may be subtle, but it's there: tracks, claw marks, disturbances in the underbrush, the faint smell of musky fur. These are signs, warnings, indicators that the pack is near. I don't go near the area anymore. I don't drive those roads after dark. I've moved my life around, changed routines, altered habits. Even then, I can feel the weight of that night pressing on me, the awareness that they might still be out there, patient, observing, deciding. I tell this story not to scare, not for thrill, but as a warning. I survived by a combination of luck and their patience, but most aren't so fortunate. There are reports, disappearances, and whispers from hunters who speak quietly about Dogman sightings. People who vanish, never accounted for, leaving only subtle disturbances behind: footprints, broken trees, fur, faint growls in the night. I still have nightmares. I still flinch at shadows. I still wake up drenched in sweat, heart hammering. But I tell the story because people need to hear it. They need to know that these creatures exist, that they are intelligent, that the rules for survival are real. If you ever drive the backroads of northern Michigan, if you ever find the forest strangely silent, heed this: leave immediately. Do not linger. Watch your step. Watch your back. And whatever you do, never underestimate the patience of what hunts in the fog. I survived, barely. And I know one thing for certain: I will never forget the night I was hunted, the Dogman pack that circled me, and the lesson they taught me about fear, patience, and survival.